On today's show, it's time to take a look at Fangraphs' ZiPS projections for the San Diego Padres offense heading into this year. Whether or not Fernando Tatis Jr. can finally give us that MVP quality season, what do they think about it? Manny Machado, the rest of the Will players, can Jackson Merrill get even better this year? All that and more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, February 11th. As always, I'm your host, sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at JAVIIPENO. If you'd like some of your questions, comments, or inquiries responded to, go check that out. And I also answer every question every Monday for the mailbag. Go check out yesterday's episode if you want a little bit of a taste into what the mailbag episode is like. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And to get started with today's episode, guys, it's going to be a fun one. We're going to just talk about some numbers. I try not to get overly analytical on this podcast because, frankly, it's a podcast, and I think oftentimes that's not the medium for it. I prefer, me personally, the more written form when it comes to getting a little bit more analytical, but that's just me. Going to be going over Fangraphs every year. We've been doing this every single year. They do their ZiPS projections. It's their own kind of model that projects out how many wins every player is going to be worth, things like home runs, all that sort of stuff for at least what is the projected roster. And granted, it is worth pointing out that Fangraphs put out the Padres ones back on January 29th, so it does not account for some of the other players that they did acquire, although I can look them up separately with the Fangraphs website and whatnot. Guys like Connor Joe, guys like Jason Heyward, for example, right? And I don't actually believe they have Elias Diaz in their projections either. So again, though, not as much for just the win total. This is just about projecting kind of individual players. And I think it'll be a lot of fun to talk about it and give my thoughts. So let us begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the person you always have to begin with. It is Fernando Tatis Jr., El Nino, the superstar of the San Diego Padres. Obviously, we've talked about this man. At least I know I have talked about this man for years, it feels like, and it's been a roller coaster with him. It really has been. And last year, the ZiPS projections predicted that he would have a 5.5 wins above replacement, that he would have a really solid overall, season, probably great season, all-star. He was an MVP favorite heading into last season in a lot of ways. 36 home runs were projected, 26 steals, all of that. And what ended up happening is that Tatis hit 21 home runs last year, and he accounted for an F4 of 3.2. Now, big part of this, of course, was the fact that he only played 102 games, right? That's the big part. So keep that in mind. And this year, they are projecting Tatis for a WAR of 4.6 this season, which is significantly lower, I think, when it comes to projections than they had last year. They have him for 29 home runs. They have him for about 521 plate appearances. So part of their projection is baking into the fact that Tatis hasn't stayed healthy for a while. But what I do think is that they actually project him to be a good defensive player, which is one of the low-key things that happened last year, is that Tatis didn't have as incredible a defensive season as he had in 2023, Platinum Glove winning season. He was -1 about outs above average last season, which was genuinely one of the more bizarre things, and he was 0 defensive runs saved. It was really, really odd. He wasn't bad or anything like that. It was just kind of shocking to see him be so, average, so lessening. And that was what was so weird about him, is that his value last year basically came entirely behind the plate. But again, last year in right field, -1 about outs above average, if I'm not mistaken, compared to last year he had 9, and defensive runs saved last year he had 27. This past year he had 0. So I think the defense will have some more highlights, right? I don't think you can fluke into platinum gloves like that. He's clearly a very talented defender. He's super athletic. He's got great range, and he's got really good arm strength. While not necessarily, Willie Mays, Roberto Clemente arm strength or anything like that, he's still got it. I think that Tatis is I'm at a crossroads personally, because I really think he's becoming one of those players where he's clearly great. He's a great player, great player. But is the question of whether or not he is a 7-win player, a 7-win MVP contending type of player, is that gone? Now, frankly, yes, I do think that with Shohei Ohtani in the division, I don't know if the MVP is ever going to be something we could hope for in general. But I will say, ever since, if you read his win totals, ever since he got popped for PED. So in 2021, he had a 6.8 wins above replacement mark. And by the way, that was in 130 games, right? He's played 130 games. By year, he played 84 games his rookie year because he got hurt, 59 in the 2020 season, which was great because there's only 60 games, then 130, then 141, then 102. And it's funny because 2023 was actually one of his healthiest seasons. He just missed time because of the suspension, right? But I think it's fair to wonder, look at his WRC plus the first 3 seasons of his career. 151, 151, 158, 112, which we kind of wrote off, understandably so, as being like, look, he's coming back from the humiliation of the PED suspension. He had the shoulder surgery. It's his first time back. Okay. Then last year, 135. So that's very, very good. But I just think it's worth at least putting out there, is this guy going to be that MVP quality player? Not just because of the defense, not just because of the offense, but because of the health, because of overall, I think it's fair to wonder, he has not been the same offensively. He's a great player, but he has not been this world beater that he was prior to the PED suspension, which is unfortunately makes the criticisms and some of the slander he gets a little bit understandable given all of this. But even still, is that number that Fangraphs projecting a little bit low? 4.6, I think you kind of have to project it low, right? Because this is a player where, yeah, he was pretty good last year when he played, but he only played 102 games. Right, so if he played the full season, I do think he could be great, but he has not shown the ability to stay healthy for a full game season, basically outside 2020, right? And I think that a lot of this team is predicated upon, because of the fact that they haven't made many additions, it's predicated on Tatis being a, kind of 7-win player. I think the projections for him are very fair, right? I know some people might see that mark, 4.6, and they're like, what? That's like 0.1 above what Bogaerts had his first year with the Padres, right? I get that. But I just think that with the fact that we have seen he's a lot more aggressive at the plate and not always in a good way. Yes, he hits the ball as hard as ever, but he's not walking as much. That's the problem with me for Fernando Tatis Jr. His walk rate has declined significantly since 2021, 8.3% in 2023, and then 7.3% last year. He makes up for it by not striking out too much, but overall, I just think that we're looking at a player where, do we have to start adjusting ourselves? Do we have to stop saying this guy's going to be a 9-win player, he's going to get a platinum glove, hit 35 bombs, steal 25 bags, be a 387 on base guy? Is that over? I don't know, because bottom line is he's just really, really young still at the age of 25. So I'm sorry, at the age of 26. Last year he was 25. I think it's a fair number. It can easily eclipse itself, right? And there's a lot of numbers that we're going to go through that were like way too low, right, on this lineup last year, like really, really low, and did not account for some of the things that happened later. But I think that overall, what we're seeing with Tatis is, I just don't know, guys. I really don't know. I can't wait to watch him play. I can't wait. He has the talent. When he played last year and when he started to find a rhythm, unfortunately, he did get hurt, though, right? That was low-key that happened. He was starting to really start to rake. And then all of a sudden gets hurt and he's out for a while. And of course, the team ended up making up for it, right? Everybody else started balling out. But that makes me a little bit worried, I think. A little bit worried about his season is, I just don't know if he could stay healthy. And the offense, bottom line, has not been, Bryce Harper level, right? It has not been Ronald Acuna Jr. at his best level. It has not been Shohei Ohtani, certainly, level. And that's kind of where we're at. I am really worried about the fact that he doesn't seem to be taking the amount of walks and being as much of a menace on the base paths as he used to be. But then again, I think at minimum, he's a 4.5-win player. I think that basically, as long as he doesn't get significantly hurt for a stretched amount of time, this projection's totally fair. But it is on the lower side. It feels like the ZiPS projections are being extremely conservative with him. And understandably so, because everyone's like, all right, can we see it now, right? But I will say, another player that we were kind of saying, can we see it now, was Ronald Acuna Jr., who I just brought up before, and he ended up putting up an 8-win season and winning that MVP, right? It had been a while since we saw him being great. It was a lot of promise. It was a lot of projecting for Ronald Acuna, and then he broke free. So it's very possible that Tatis hits the ground running, delivers a 7.5-win season, basically a contender for the MVP, and that he can carry a lot of the missing pieces from the Padres offense. But then again, we'll have to see, right? We'll have to see. But that's it for Tatis, guys. And we took a long time talking about Tatis. And don't worry, we will not take one player per segment and whatnot, because these are just the ZiPS projections that we're going over. We're not going to use every single episode. We're going to talk a lot more about Tatis individually as time goes on for the rest of this offseason, with all the catchers and pitchers reporting soon. But for now, guys, it's just ZiPS. And for now, I got to take a break to bring you one of our sponsors, and that is the always impeccable friends over at FanDuel. You guys know we love FanDuel here. FanDuel's an excellent company. They do the Lord's work. And why do they do the Lord's work? Because they give you cool bonuses, folks. And with the NBA action in full swing, just getting started really in a lot of ways, there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150. That would have been crazy. Can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And all right, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, thriving and vibing. As always, talking about ZiPS projections. We just talked a bit about Tatis. Now let's talk about the secondary stars on this team, and in some cases, superstars. But I want to talk about one that the projections are a little bit low on, and that is Xander Bogaerts. Heading into last season, ZiPS was actually pretty bullish on him, and so was I. You can pull up my numbers last year. My thing was, I was slandering Trey Turner on last year's podcast. My thing was, well, he was really bad, and he didn't even play good defense. Xander Bogaerts at least gave them defense. And ZiPS kind of was saying, you know what? We're expecting a little bit of a bounce back, or at least him to just be really good and be more consistently good. The problem with Xander Bogaerts in 2023 was that he just didn't hit with runners in scoring position. That's what happened. And after he got hit on his wrist, it really just made him enter a season, not a season long, but like a slump for a really long time. And, well, the projection was good for him. It was 4.1 F4. He ended up finishing not so great, of course, with an F4 of, let's see, I believe it was like the 6th best on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th best on the team at just 2 and a 95 WRC plus. He did not have an on-base percentage above 307, guys, and he was projected last year to have an on-base percentage of 346. Just be a solid hitter, really, is kind of all they were expecting. This year now, ZiPS has adjusted. They have Xander Bogaerts being a 2.9 win player, being a decent batter, 262, 326, not a bad batting average and on-base percentage, but 393 slugging. That is what scares me. That is just 2 points higher than Jake Cronenworth, and even more scary, that is just 2 points lower than Luis Ariz is what ZiPS has him pegged for. Look, I've said it before. Xander Bogaerts we're really close to making the Eric Hosmer contract look like kid stuff. And one of the reasons I said that the Xander Bogaerts contract, same thing with Jake Cronenworth and Eric Hosmer, I think that Jake Cronenworth, what you can take with you is, yes, the years don't make sense. Yes, it doesn't make sense that they extended a player like that when you really didn't need to, right? Especially when you had arbitration control and you already have the Tatis and Manny contracts. Tatis already happening and then Manny would be incoming. Why are you just hamstringing yourself? You should take advantage of the fact that you have a little bit more club control on these guys. Wait and see what you have out of them, especially since you're going to be moving them in the first base. With Xander Bogaerts, it's arguable that this could be worse than Eric Hosmer because it's 11 years and it was for a position you had. Ha-Seong Kim, could they just have extended him for another 5 years, right? Frankly, even if they didn't last year, you put Jackson Merrill potentially. If they don't have Bogaerts and Jackson Merrill's playing shortstop, and we could say, all right, Ha-Seong Kim got hurt. You get him on 2 years, 29. That sounds a lot better for the future of the Padres right now. And for me, what I'm looking at with this player, this is a guy whose expected weight on a base has gone down every year. This is a guy whose walk rate has gone down every year. This is a guy, most importantly, whose hard hit rate has gone down every single year. for the past 4 seasons. That is not the sign of a player who's going to get any better. And I think 2.9 wins above replacement is actually extremely generous on the behalf of ZiPS. I think the big part that they're basically projecting is just that he'll be a little bit more healthy. He'll play more games, right? But other than that, this is really, really rough, guys. This is rough. I'm not kidding about the hard hit rate. In 2021, his last really great season, last really great season, but one of his peak seasons, 43%. Year after, 39.5. Year after that, 34.6. Year after that, 33.2. That is not what happens when you're a great player. As combined with the walk rate, I'm really worried. And I actually think that this projection is pretty dang good. The one thing that he has been doing good at is being a pretty good defensive shortstop. Not amazing. He's not Ha-Seong Kim, but he gives you some value there. He's not a minus. But, is that much to say? Right? There's a lot of good defensive shortstops out there. There's a lot of good players that, can add some value in that regard. And I'm not saying, every shortstop that is only good offensively is better than Bogaerts, right? Bo Bichette was like a disaster last year since he wasn't hitting out of the American League. But I'm worried about it. And I think this projection is super, super fair. And yeah, I have nothing else to say. We'll have to break down Xander Bogaerts even further. But for right now, we're basically the only thing that we can hope for is, well, it's Xander Bogaerts. He'll figure it out. The name value is all we have going for us right now. Sorry to get dark, but it is true. Next player up, though, is Manny Machado. Last year projected by ZiPS to have a wins above replacement mark of 4.1, hitting a generous amount of home runs as well. It's 26 home runs. And honestly, Manny Machado outperformed this. I think he seriously outperformed this, so I think the ZiPS projection for him this year, which is a mark of 3.8 wins above replacement, I get it. They're baking into it the age and the fact that he is older and the fact that he doesn't walk as much as he used to. He is striking out just a little bit more, right? Doesn't have that same level of plate discipline as he had. Same level of plate discipline. Wow, I can't speak. Give me 1 minute. Doesn't have the same level of plate discipline as he's had in the past. But consider this. Manny Machado had the surgery last year, and he was dreadful for the beginning of 2024. In March and April, he put together a WRC plus of 96, and then after that, 75. So he was 25% worse than your average player in that month of May. And what happened? We started to see he fully overcame it. It was the injury. It was the shoulder surgery. You could basically argue that the Padres' lack of depth, and frankly, I criticize him for this. I thought Eguy Rosario should have got more play at third base. I really do. But Manny Machado also, on top of the injury, he was playing DH a lot to start the season. And I think that with that, it's not always easy. There's actually a really great article by Hannah Kaiser over at The Ringer that talks about the DH thing and that it's a mental thing, whatever it is. Guys get worse when they're DH spot. It's not as simple as it sounds in theory where it's like, all you have to do is focus on hitting. Not always. But in the case of Machado, after the March and April slumps, and May as well, in June, 145 WRC plus. In July, 132. In August, 158. In September and October, 133, 142 WRC plus combined in the second half. He hit 29 home runs. So he outpaced ZiPS' projections last year in terms of the power, considering he was basically a player playing at the beginning like someone who should have been on the IL. But the team just didn't have the depth necessary to be able to just put him there and say, you know what, you're sitting out the first month, whatever. And it's fine. I do think that the defensive capabilities of Machado are still there, but does he have that like gold, platinum glove type of ability still? I don't know. He is getting up there in age, but he should be at the very minimum a plus. I actually think this projection of 3.8, it's fair, but I would not be surprised if he's a 4.5. Because again, he performed really well, and we know for a fact that a lot of the stuff that happened at the beginning of last year wasn't some like, oh no, the decline is here. It was more like, oh, he's getting over an injury. You know what I mean? That's why his numbers were a little bit down last year. And for him to put up the season that he put up, I'm really bullish on Machado. I think Machado is going to be great. I could see a 30 home run season. I could see a 30 home run season. Will it be at the cost of some of his plate discipline skills, though? That I could see. I could see his walk rate declining this year, potentially. They have him actually pegged to be an on-base guy of 323 this year, which is a little bit low, you know what I mean? But if he can just play good defense and club 30 home runs, not much more you can ask for, right? Like, as long as he just has a steady decline as he gets older, that's all you can really hope for, right? Of a player of his stature and how much wear and tear he has on his body already. So, totally fine with Manny Machado. I do think the ZiPS is a little bit low on him, understandably so, but I'm expecting a good season. Next up, though, we haven't talked about him yet, is Jackson Merrill. Of course, he's a weird guy to look at last year because they basically were like, I don't know. They were expecting him by ZiPS projections last year to be a 1.5 win player. Barely, actually, 1.4 win player. They actually projected him to have the same amount of WAR as Eguy Rosario, 1.4. They expected him to be someone who struggled with getting on base at a decent clip, 290 on base projected. He ended up being much, much better than that. In fact, he was the best player basically on the Padres last year by wins above replacement, 5.3. He had the WRC plus of 130. He hit 24 home runs. He was awesome. And especially in the second half, he found his power stroke. Now, what do we think for this year? I mean, it's a little bit tricky, right? 4.3 wins above replacement is what ZiPS has him for this year, which is pretty dang good. 281 batting average, 322 on base. Now, that might freak you out. But remember that this is still a young player, and a lot of his batted ball, home run, fly ball stuff did increase pretty significantly in the second half. Now, I am really bullish on him because I just think this kid is freakishly talented. I really do. I think we could live in a world next year where he's consensus, like a top 3 center fielder, maybe even top 2, I could say, right? I actually think he could be number 1. The sky is the limit for Jackson Merrill, but it is worth pointing out that he still has a problem with walking. The good news with him, if you are worried about the on-base stuff, is he makes contact all the time, which suggests that he's not going to just like struggle and strike out all the time, right? He is good at that. But it is worth noting, Corbin Carroll had a really bad sophomore slump in 2024, right? He ended up figuring it out. So this is not me saying, wow, Jackson Merrill is going to be a bust this year. It's super sophomore slump. But Corbin Carroll really struggled. And I could see a world in which Jackson Merrill is a guy who plays electric defense, and he hits for good average, but he doesn't walk enough, and maybe pitchers find out some things with him. They find out how to get him to chase. They go up inside on him, and they just kind of take advantage of the fact that he's still a young player. And I think he will figure it out. But the total win mark of 4.3, that sounds low, right? I know some of my commenters are going to be like, he's a 6-win player. What are you talking about? I just can see a world in which Jackson Merrill struggles a bit out of the gate. I could. And I think that it's something that you have to bake into your projections, and it's fine because I think he'll finish strong. The kid's too talented. He just is. You can't really replicate the type of production that he does. And what I love the best is that he's an excellent defensive player. So even if at the beginning of the season, if he's a 270 hitter with a 310 on base, not quite the same level of power, maybe he's not ripping the doubles, maybe he's getting on base and he's still fast and all that, he's still going to provide you great defense. I don't see that going away at all. He's got an alpha attitude towards him, and this projection might look super stupid by the time we're done with the month of April, right? So I'm really excited for Jackson Merrill, and frankly, he's one of the reasons that's like, guys, even if you're like one of those people being really cynical about whether or not this team can win a certain amount of games, let's just be excited about Jackson Merrill. Let's just be like, this is going to be a fun player to watch, and he's hopefully a guy that they're going to keep on this team for a long time. So really bullish on Jackson Merrill, even if the projections are being a little bit conservative for him going forward. I think it makes sense. Plenty of players have had little tough strides in their second year, and Julio Rodriguez being another one. That guy was like a rookie of the year, and then his second year, really good, but struggled out of the gate. He hasn't quite taken that next step. So I think until we know for sure that the power is there, for sure, I'm a little bit dubious of it, I think that this projection makes total sense. But guys, before we get into the rest of the players, and especially the role players and kind of how I feel about the rest of the lineup, we got to take one more break to hear a few words from our sponsors. And just like that, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, thriving and vibing as always. Folks, let's talk about the rest of the players on this team, namely Jake Cronenworth. Ladies and gentlemen, we love Jake Cronenworth, and I was really bullish on him last year, and he ended up outperforming pretty significantly his ZiPS projections last year. They pegged him as a 1.7 wins above replacement player who would hit only about, 14 home runs, and guess what he ended up doing? He ended up outpacing that. He was actually a 2.1 win player. He did face a little bit of a slump later on in the season, but solid offensive player, solid defensive player. he is one of those guys that you can't really expect him to replicate what he did in 2020 and 2021, right? Like, I'm just not expecting that from him. I'm just not. I'm not. And I think that you shouldn't either, right? But I think that overall, this is still a player that can handle the infield pretty well if he ends up playing a lot more second base, especially with the addition of Connor Joe, who can also play first base. Also, if they move around Tyler Wade, and because they have Luis Ariz, they have a little bit more depth. I think the roster management, the lineup management is going to be very interesting with this team. Like, how much does Tirso and Ellis play? How much does Luis Ariz play at first base? Can he be a decent defensive player and then move Cronenworth over to second? What about Eguy Rosario? There's a lot of questions, but for me, I think Jake Cronenworth, you can just pencil him in as a 2-win player. I really do. I think that he's going to be pretty solid this year. The upside is there. If there's some movement and he ends up playing a little bit more consistently at second base, that's where you're going to get more value from him, at least in my opinion. I think that there are other players out there where it's like whatever. But also, as they write in this Projections article, for our guy here, let me just make sure I can read properly. I'm scrolling a little bit too fast. Jake Cronenworth is back to mostly playing the position where he's most valuable, and though he's overrated because of batting average, Luis Ariz is about as good as a first baseman can be when he has less power than the Plantagenet Air Force. ZiPS also still really likes Eguy Rosario as a plus role player, something that Streamer has gotten more bullish about. That's right, they have him being a 1.5 win player, Eguy Rosario. And I know that's like a shocking development, right? That Eguy Rosario is going to be a player that ZiPS Projections likes more. Or, I'm sorry, Eguy Rosario, oh my God. They have him as a 2-win player, actually. My mistake. I think that, last year. I'm reading way too many numbers, guys. This is why you should always be skeptical when I read your numbers. This is why I wasn't very good at math in high school and college, frankly, too. They have him being a 2-win player. If they can get a 2-win season out of Eguy Rosario, we are cooking. And here's what would happen. Here's how I think that would happen, right? Eguy Rosario is a platoon guy. He can absolutely rake at DH, but I think his glove is underrated, and he's still super young at age 25. I think they need to give this guy playing time. I thought they should have given him more playing time last year, and I understand his splits are, like, genuinely pretty unbelievable. Like, in 2024, this guy had a WRC plus of 182 against lefties and then 23 against righties. Like, I don't know what it is, but I think that ZiPS basically just really likes his power. They like his stroke, and they think that his defense is pretty good enough that he can be, in my opinion, one of the better role players on the team and possibly in the division. I'm really high on Eguy Rosario, and I think if we're being really, really optimistic about the Padres, we could say, you know what? They like Eguy Rosario, and they're saying we know he's going to be pretty good. Luis Ariz, he's always going to have a low WAR projection. I actually think that he's a player that is just a little bit more than WAR. You know what I mean? I think that there's something to be said for a change of pace sort of bat. That being said, 2-win player, hit 307, 348, 395 slash line. This is a guy who's not going to give you as much defensively, certainly not with speed. But I like that there's a lot of mix and match potential. I like that Jake Cronenworth can play more second base. I really, really do. I think it's going to give him more defensive opportunities. And I think Ariz, Eguy maybe, Connor Joe, whatever they end up doing at that position and in like a full-time respect, I don't know, man. I think that we can get something really pretty decent here. I think he could be the best bat off the bench, and I think on the certain days when you're hitting against lefties, I think he could absolutely crush these guys. I mean, he was crushing last year, and he didn't even have consistent playing time. That's another thing. I like consistency. So, Eguy Rosario, Luis Ariz, and Jake Cronenworth, all these guys I think are actually being a tad bit underrated. I think the problem for the Padres right now is left field. I think left field is the problem with Tirso and Ellis, Lockridge, Gonzalez, and of course with the signings of Jason Heyward and Connor Joe. Here's the thing. Jason Heyward, they have pegged by Fangraphs' projections as less than a 1-win player, but that's to be expected, right? That's not exactly breaking news. Jason Heyward was not very good last year. But 0.8 win player. I'm intrigued. If you can get 0.8 out of Heyward, and he's one of the guys who plays a little bit more often than not, and then you have Tirso, who could just be a decent bat, although ZiPS isn't all that high on him, right? Let me be very clear. They are not very high on him, and this is where the holes start to show, right? This is where the holes start to show. As they write in the article, the problems in left field were papered over by Jurickson Profar's surprise all-star season, but lucking into a performance like that every year is a very tall order, and Profar is now employed by the Atlanta Braves. Left field is likely to be a problem again, while designated hitter isn't set to be anything more ambitious than the day-off hitter position. The catcher situation is decidedly mediocre, by the way. Well, that's the other thing. Elias Diaz and Martin Maldonado, and then, of course, Luis Campusano. ZiPS was really low on Campusano last year. I didn't really get it, but 0.9 for him, it's whatever. But back to Tirso. Tirso is just, I have no idea. It's just one of those players you can't project. Just as simple as that. You just can't project a player like this. I think it's going to be a little bit of a mess, but in my opinion, I think it should be Heyward and Tirso sharing time there. I don't think Brandon Lockridge has it. I don't think he's particularly all that great at too many things, and certainly not Gonzalez either. I think Tirso, you give a little bit of time, and Heyward is the guy that, depending on the platoon split, depending on who's pitching that day, you put him in as being just a really solid defensive player in the outfield. And by the way, there's the potential with Jason Heyward. Even if he's not going to be an awesome defensive player, there will be nights when you have a plus-plus defender in Merrill, I believe will be a plus-plus defender in Tatis, and a moderately plus pretty good defender in Jason Heyward in left field. Just a really good outfield. That's not bad. Now, it ain't the Arizona Diamondbacks. It ain't the LA Dodgers, and it's not the best outfield in the league, but that's a pretty good outfield, one that you can expect to at least be competitive. And if either Merrill or Tatis hit their upside, especially in the case of the latter, then it's going to make up for the rest of the outfield. I do think catcher and DH is going to be weird, but DH is always weird, so I'm willing to almost be like, you know what, whatever. Eguy might hit 20 home runs for all I know, right? Not 20 home runs. 20 home runs is a little bit much for Eguy Rosario, but even still, I just think that ZiPS likes him for a reason, and if he's a guy who can hit what they expect, right, 16 home runs, that's huge for this team, because it's also one of the things about the ZiPS projections is they're basically giving you the floor of every player on the Padres. And that's fine, right? They were really bullish on Fernando Tatis Jr. last year, kind of bit them. But to me, when you look at the rest of this lineup, I don't think it's great. I really don't think that it's good that they lost Profar. I think losing Profar was very rough, because if they had Profar in left field, and then they have Tirso as like a little bit of a lottery ticket, and then if they don't have Tirso, they maybe have Heyward as a little bit of a defensive replacement. I just think that that's great. You know what I mean? But instead, you're kind of just hoping that one of these guys hits. But to me, I'd rather have no options I'd rather have some options than none. I think Heyward, Connor Joe, Eguy Rosario certainly. I think it gives you some potential that the role players in this lineup are going to produce. I'm not expecting much from catching. I actually think catching, they're one of the lowest projected F4 totals among all catching platoon, cores in baseball. Campusano, Elias Diaz, Martin Maldonado, Brett Sullivan, I don't know. I think spring training is going to be very, very interesting to follow when it comes to the catcher position, because if Campusano shows up at spring training and we get some word, hey, he's actually changed a little bit. He's bulked up. He's getting better defensively. Maybe Martin Maldonado, as Susan in our mailbag segment yesterday asked, maybe he's going to be a decent mentor in that regard. I think if he's just okay, projections for this team go way up. You know what I mean? One of the fun things about the 2023 season, while everything was really bad, was that Luis Campusano and Gary Sanchez were awesome, right? Gary Sanchez was a home run or bust guy, but good defense. And Campusano was a batting average on base guy with bad defense. So you had this really good platoon going. I'm not saying they're going to be able to get that going again. There's no power upside whatsoever with catcher. And if your catchers aren't providing you good defensive value and they're not hitting home runs, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. But I've seen crazier before. Campusano was astonishingly bad last year, and he was astonishingly good the year before. I know he hit a little bit above his head at 23, but I still think he can produce at least a decent amount. And ZiPS at least thinks that, even if they don't get that there, I still think they could get something out of Xander Bogaerts, right? What if Xander Bogaerts comes in and gives you a 3-win season with decent batting average, maybe 270, 330 on base, 15 home runs? It's not the craziest thing to ask for, right? Maybe there's something with him, and maybe this offseason he's been working, and he's going to get back. There have been crazier things. I remember Evan Longoria looked like he was toast, and he had 35 home runs one year. So while these are totally different players, I just think that they're being really conservative about all of them, right? And left field, DH, and catcher will be the question about this team, but do not underestimate what it means that they have depth at every position, that they can move Cronenworth around, especially back to second, which is what I think he should be playing. I think he's a utility, solid defensive player who gives you a decent amount of pop, 15, 16, 17 home runs. He hit more home runs than was projected last year, right? They only projected him for 14, and this past year, he actually managed to kind of outpace that. So I'm just saying, crazier things have happened, guys, and I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm excited. I just feel like looking at these projections got me excited. There's a little bit of unknown, but that's okay. You know what I mean? There's been worse things out there. I think that basically this team, when you look at their lineup, this is a team that could easily win 90 games, and everyone would be like, wow. It could also just as easily be a 77-win team. I don't think it'd be any worse than that, but it could be. And I think that's why Preller is shooting for the moon, by the way. In the Cease trade rumors, he's like, I want to get like a superstar building block. I don't know if he's going to get that, but for me, I think with this team's kind of current depth added where it's at, if either Merrill or Tatis perform like stars, certainly if both of them, if we, by the end of the year, if Jackson Merrill is a 4.5 win player and Tatis is a 7-win player, I promise you the Padres are going to be in playoff contention. I really do. I really do. Because then the rest of the guys, all they have to do is just be okay. Luis Arraez was hurt last year. He had the thumb issue. That's a big factor into why he wasn't hitting well. But when the guy hits, he hits well. As they mentioned, for a guy who doesn't play good defense, he's going to be okay. I really do believe that. I think he's going to produce a decent amount. And then you have Manny Machado, who, yes, he might go down in the on-base percentage, but he still has the power. And we saw last year that he had plenty of power, and it was just that his shoulder was bugging him. That's all it was. That's all it was. He was just getting used to it. Left field is going to be interesting, though. It's going to be left field, and it's going to be DH. Catcher, I'm ready to just say is a wash, even if I have hope as a founder of the Campizano Hive. But when it comes to left field, who is going to break out? I'm praying that Tirso can give them some value, but it's probably going to be Jason Heyward, which, by the way, at the minimum, like I just mentioned before, not to repeat my thoughts, at least that means you will have an awesome defensive outfield, basically all the time. And he could also play right field and center field in a pinch if needed. But I think if Merrill and Tatis play defensively as the way that I think that they can, the way they looked when they were like this duo in the outfield last year, always bumping elbows and everything, and then you have Heyward, there's worse things to get for $1 million than a guy who's just going to give you solid defense. That counts in this league. It absolutely counts. And then you hope maybe they see something with Connor Joe, maybe they see something with Tirso, and we figure out the rest. And I love how high ZiPS is on Eguy Rosario. The guy's got pop. He looked good last year. He really did. I thought he should be playing more. They played him like every other day. What if he's just the DH for a bit? Give him a little bit of a longer handle. What if you play him at second base a little bit more? Right? What if you play him around there? It's going to be fun, guys. It's going to be fun to see how it all plans out. And we're going to find out more about the lineup as we get closer to spring training. But that is my initial breakdown of the ZiPS projections for the Padres. If there's another player you want to hear about, feel free to let me know. This is just a weird team, man. It's a weird team, but I still think that there's some potential here to be a pretty competitive one. And all you need to do is get into the dance. And with the extra wild card, Lord knows that ain't as hard as it used to be. And again, I just, last thing, just one more time. I'm sorry to repeat myself, but it's possible that we've been overthinking this and that Merrill and Tatis can just go supernova and the rest of the lineup will just be solid. I think that the rest of the lineup has a really high floor. I really do. But with that all being said, guys, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about pitching, because why not? Got to talk about the pitching, starting pitching, and bullpen. But until that next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.